the Remembering Akron podcast. I'm your host, Derek Maxfield, and today my guest is Shandra Hake. Welcome, Shandra.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So your story starts in 1969.
Yes.
That was just at the end of the Vietnam War. Was anybody in your family involved in that?
No, I think my father was too old and he was married already with children when that started. Okay. So his brother was too young, so kind of bridged the age range for that.
Okay. So you were born in Geneva, right? Buffalo Geneva Hospital?
Buffalo General Hospital.
Buffalo General Hospital. I'm sorry, I couldn't read that. Your parents are Paul Hake and Sylvia Sutton. Tell me about them.
My father's family grew up in Akron. Ida Hake was his grandmother. She used to write for the paper here in Akron, and I've been told a lot of the Historical Society's information has come from her articles. Oh. My father grew up in Corfu, Indian Falls, and then when he and my mother got married, 1964, I think, they moved to Akron on Shepherd Avenue. They built a house together. My mother, Sylvia Sutton, was the daughter of Louis Sutton and Bernice Perry, both also from Akron. And she grew up on Highwind Farm on Buell Street, which is still there, where my uncle runs the farm with his wife, and they raise horses and teach classes, and they also judge horse shows still, even though they're in their 60s.
That's quite the place out there.
It's beautiful. It was a beautiful place to grow up, and I was very lucky.
Yeah. Very nice. And so you grew up in Akron all your life then. You went to Akron Schools. Do you have any wonderful memories from school?
I have wonderful memories of the friends that I have. I have friends that I've known since kindergarten, and we are still close. Still, the people that I know that I could call on if I needed anything, they'd jump up and run to help me. I was in cheerleading from Little League through high school, and so I have a lot of good memories with the friendships and camaraderie with the young men playing sports, as well as the other cheerleaders that I worked with as a cheerleader. We had a lot of school spirit. We believed in our school, and we cheered them on, whether kind of like the Sabres and the Bills.
Never lose faith.
Never lose faith, and support the team.
Nice. Do you have any favorite teachers that you can remember?
Mr. Edgar was one of my favorite teachers. He was an English teacher, lived here in Akron. I knew his son and his now daughter-in-law. I always say that Mr. Edgar taught me the two most important things I ever learned in high school, and that was in a public speaking class. And he taught me how to give a proper handshake, and he taught me how to introduce two people who didn't know each other in a way that I could walk away and they could continue the conversation. So you find something about that person that the other person can relate to, and put that as part of the introduction. And I have used that my entire life since 11th grade.
Wow. That's really cool. So what did you do once you graduated high school?
I went to Ohio University and got my Bachelor's of Science in Communication for video production and writing.
Oh, nice.
With an emphasis on advertising writing.
All right.
I loved Ohio University, still love Ohio University. And then after that, I came back for a few years. I had trouble finding work in the Buffalo area, and I ended up moving to Chicago for a job.
Oh, I see.
I ended up working at a non-broadcast video production company from 1994 until my first son was born in 1998.
So how did you like the Windy City?
I love Chicago. Chicago is fantastic. It's kind of like a bigger Buffalo, and I think anybody who likes Buffalo should go to Chicago and and see the sights. It's a great place.
Yeah. So what brought you back here?
When I got divorced, it became apparent that I was going to be parenting my children alone.
Oh.
And I came home to be surrounded by the support of my family and even my ex-husband's family who live in Western New York.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. So did you find another job here right away?
I found a job prior to moving back. I was traveling back and forth. I worked for a sleep center for 2 years as a sleep tech, and then got a job at the Erie County Medical Center in the social work office, where I worked for 4.5 years before moving up through civil service to my current position as a senior caseworker with the Department of Social Services.
I see. And I understand you're still working on your education.
Yes, I'm currently studying higher education and student affairs administration at Buff State for my master's degree.
Student affairs administration. So you're thinking about getting into higher ed?
Yes. I would like to work advising students or working directly with students to help increase success rates. My job with the Department of Social Services has shown me there's a lot of struggle for kids who've had social services, child welfare involvement, and I'd like to support students in that category and first-generation students, because when you increase their higher ed success, you increase their economic success, which helps to break the chain of neglect.
That's really an excellent goal. So you have 3 children?
I have 2 children. I lost 2 infants prematurely.
I'm sorry.
It was a long time ago, and I've come to grips with it.
So the children, your living children then, are adults now?
Patrick will be 21 soon,
okay, and
Colin will be 18, but is still in high school, because in Illinois they start students later.
I see.
The cutoff for starting school is August, whereas here in New York it's in December.
So are they both living in Illinois then?
No, they live with me.
Oh.
My older son is working on getting an apartment to continue closer to where he's going to be going to school.
I see. All right. Very good. Well, it sounds to me, too, that you are very, very involved in the community.
I have been, and I try to be, but right now my schedule is a little tight for that. But I used to volunteer for Open Arms Rescue, which mainly consisted of going to adoption events and talking to people about puppies, or going to the foster homes and playing with puppies. So it really was not a hardship for me to do that.
No, it doesn't sound like it. But still, it's a wonderful thing to be doing. And you've done work with the Right Center, too, I understand.
Yes, I helped do a couple of craft nights on the teen nights, brought a couple of fun things for the kids to do for their Friday teen nights, where usually it's middle school age kids or kids coming out of the end of elementary school, and they do Friday night, and they'll do an educational video to make sure it's a little bit educational, and then the kids get to play foosball and ping pong and all sorts of things, and I've done some crafts for those.
That's nice. I understand you have some interesting memories from life in the village here.
Yes.
Your stepfather is David Ross?
Yes. Mr. Ross, and people think it's funny, but I still call him Mr. Ross. But I've known him since before he was my stepfather. He and his father, Adrian Ross, ran both a funeral home on John Street and a paint and wallpaper store, which was on Main Street. And my mother worked for them in the paint store, and then she eventually purchased the paint store from them. And so I used to go to the paint store after school when I was too young to go home by myself, and used to sit and do my homework at the desk and watch the people come in. And the paint store had shelves that went all the way to the ceiling and a ladder that was on a running track. And so we would like to climb the ladder and push it back and forth. And sometimes we got in trouble and sometimes we didn't, or My mother would let me help her when you put the paint together. Back then, it was like a dial system to put the tints in the paint, but she would tell me which number and help me figure out that, and I'd get to do that. It was sort of playing, but it was fun. And then it was always fun to watch the paint go in the shaker machine.
Yeah, right.
So, and they also, the funeral home they ran on John Street. I don't know if they're aware of this, but when I was in middle school, or we called it junior high then, and we were young, we used to play hide and seek in the funeral home when there was no client there. I don't know, I had kind of a, I don't know if I'd call it a mean streak, but I used to hide in the closets that had the slatted bifold doors and wait for the boy who thought he was the toughest guy in the world and run my fingers up the slats and watch them run screaming because they were scared because it was the funeral home.
The funeral home.
So, but it was always a really good adventure. I think that growing up here, one thing that my children found once we moved back here is once one person knows who you are, everybody knows who you are. And my family's been here for generations, so everybody always knew who I was. You can't really get in a lot of trouble, or you can't do anything that might get you in trouble because it's going to get back to your parents no matter what.
It sounds like you have some great memories from growing up here. I was just talking to somebody that was telling me about the history of the Oasis, and I understand that that's one of your favorite places too.
Yeah, the Oasis was a little store where you could buy a soda. They had slushies, candy, and they had a game room in the back room. So in the early 80s, when video games were becoming a thing, you could find a lot of kids in the back room there. And because it was just a few doors down from the paint store, you know, it would be okay for me to walk over there and get a slushie by myself. Or I could run over to Park Deli, which people call the Crush store now because we still have the Crush sign, but we called it Niggs. You're also talking about a time where my mother could say, go up to Niggs and get me a pack of cigarettes. And I was 8 years old, and I would say I need a pack of cigarettes for my mother. And I didn't even have to take money. They would write it down on a list, and my mom would settle up with them later. You know, I'd be like, well, can I get something? And, you know, so it was just back and forth. And the people who ran that store, their kids went to high school with my older brothers and sisters, or they babysat us, or so everybody knew everybody. I mean, I still have people call me the little Hake girl because I was the youngest in my family.
Well, little towns are kind of like that. Everybody gets to know everybody, and people trust one another. Though I do think times have changed a bit, right? You can't walk down the street if you're small and feel safe as much anymore as 40 years ago.
I think for the most part, I mean, no, you're not going to let your 6-year-old walk up to the corner store for you by themselves. And I think that that's more of an awareness and us being bombarded with news of bad things happening to people. But I think past a certain age, 8 or 9 years old, Akron is still a pretty safe place. We do still, you know, we have the problems everybody has. But for the most part, you know, we look out for each other. And I know my kids have been places and people have said, hey, I saw your son doing this, and I'll call or text him and say, where are you going? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, so-and-so saw you walking up Buell Street. Where are you going? And how did you know that? They always, how did you know? I said, you can't go anywhere. People are keeping an eye out. And that's a nice thing, too.
It is a nice thing. All right, so I've saved the most difficult question for last. You ready? Mm-hmm. So imagine years from now, when you're gone, and your grandchildren are talking to their children about you. What would you hope they would say?
I would hope that my children and grandchildren would say that they always knew that I'd be there for them. I love them no matter what. and if they needed me, they knew they could count on me.
Wonderful. And on that note, thank you so much, Chandra, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening in, and remember to tune in to the next episode of Remembering Akron.